Hi, I'm Sergey Panachuk. I'm a Ukrainian journalist with 20 years of experience. I'm a freelancer for The Sun and Daily Mail. And I'm here with my colleague Mike right now.
My name is Michael Washura. I'm an American journalist. I lived in Russia for 8 years, Ukraine for about 5, including 2 during the full-scale war, writing for Newsweek, and got to know Sergey there. And I have to say that the work of Western journalists in places like Ukraine depends on the work of people like Sergey, who know the language, know the culture, know which authorities to talk to go where, and really make it possible for the rest of the world to have some understanding of what's happening in a very complicated situation, like what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. And without him, the work of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and everybody else who gets all the attention would not be possible. And Sergey knows what's happening better than those journalists do. And so it's really important to talk to people like Sergey, listen to people like Sergey, ask them questions, listen to the answers, and learn a lot. Because all of the articles you read in the New York Times or Washington Post, they come from direct sources like people like Sergey.
Thank you, Mike. Actually, we're also in Ukraine trying to understand what's going on around us.
Yep.
It's not really that easy. And so we are here to talk about Trump's inauguration and about the consequences, what will happen with the war, what will happen with Ukraine. And I would like to start from the definition. What is the just to define what are Russians fighting for what Russians are fighting for in Ukraine and what Ukrainians are fighting for in Ukraine?
That's a really good question, because if you ask essentially any of my colleagues or any of my sources and interlocutors in Washington, you will get a different answer from what I will give you. If you ask just about anybody what Russians are fighting for in Ukraine, the answer is something along the lines of Russians themselves don't know, but Putin is fighting for some sort of imperialist glory in order to return Ukraine to the Russian Empire. I mentioned at the beginning, I lived in Russia for 8 years, and I fundamentally disagree with that interpretation. I'm one of the few people who thinks Putin is actually smart. And I want to be very clear that I don't mean that as a good thing. But from before the start of this war, I think he demonstrated a desire to do one thing above all others, and that is to stay in power in Russia. And everything he did in order to actually begin this war required tricking Russians into going along with it. The vast majority of people who I knew, not only in Moscow, but in the provinces in Russia, in January, February of 2022, did not want there to be an invasion of Ukraine. And most of the people in the Russian government, it seems, did not even expect there to be an invasion of Ukraine. In order for Putin to get this war started, he had to fool a lot of people inside of Russia, and not just regular people, but also some pretty high-level people, like Sergei Shoigu, who I do not believe saw the invasion plan before it happened. That's a separate story. But the reason why Russians are still fighting is because they are still simply clueless about what's happening. And so in order to find any sort of solution that will convince the person who tricked them, and that's Vladimir Putin, to stop fighting, is going to require a lot of work. And I can be more specific if you want me to.
I'm fine with it, and our understanding, understanding of Ukrainian people, that Ukraine is fighting for its very existence. What do you think about it?
That's 100% true. Ukraine was attacked. This is a cliche, but if Russia stops fighting, the war ends. If Ukraine stops fighting, there's no more Ukraine. The result of what Putin did is that Ukraine is absolutely in a fight for its existence. The problem is, from my perspective, recognizing Russian control formally, diplomatically, over Donetsk and Lugansk and Crimea and even Zaporozhye and Kherson will not end the war, because that's not what Putin actually started the war in order to achieve. He started this war in order to make the situation in Russia fundamentally worse in a way that would allow him to restore the kind of authoritarian control that he needed in order to stay in power. And the war, from that point of view, has actually been a remarkable success for him, even though it's been a complete disaster for Russia itself. And of course, it's been much worse for Ukraine. Ukraine must keep fighting, or else Ukraine will cease to exist. So Ukrainians are fighting for their very existence, and that's a reality.
And now Donald Trump, he said that he wants to end the war. He wants Ukraine, basically he wants Ukraine to stop fighting. He wants Russia to stop fighting. But I think that he emphasized that he wants Ukraine to stop fighting. So what do you think about that? And how is it possible to end the war in this situation right now? What the situation would you have right now?
So I'm in Washington right now. And I'm American, and you mentioned that it's difficult to understand what's happening on the ground in Ukraine as a Ukrainian. As an American, we still really do not have a good idea, and I do personally, I do not have a good idea about how much Trump actually knows and understands about what's happening in the world. Donald Trump is someone who, as a presidential candidate, said things like illegal aliens, illegal immigrants are eating ordinary Americans' dogs and cats. He says a lot of things that are insane sounding. And it's really difficult to understand if when he's talking about annexing Greenland, he's being serious, and if when he's talking about ending the war in Ukraine, he has any actual idea about how to do that. The conventional wisdom in Washington, separate from Trump, really is that we just need to find an acceptable solution which will satisfy the Russian side, satisfy the Ukrainian side, to end the fighting, and that's feasible. As I explained before, I don't think Putin will stop fighting under any circumstances. But Trump, unusually, is kind of in the mainstream when it comes to American politicians, in that he believes there is a potential diplomatic solution. And the question is just, how much is Ukraine going to need to concede in order to reach that solution? Is it Donetsk, Lugansk, Crimea? Is it Donetsk, Lugansk, Crimea, and the portions of Zaporozhye and Kherson Oblast that Russia occupies? Is it an agreement that Ukraine will not join NATO for 10 years or 20 years? Trump, when he comes into office, probably will start discussing all of these potential ways to end the war. And within Washington, there will be serious discussion about if a Ukrainian promise not to join NATO could end this and could have ended this before it even started. And again, from my perspective, I think all of those discussions are about unrealistic scenarios. Because I don't think Putin is fighting for the reasons that we think he's fighting for. And I think Ukraine will continue to have to fight for as long as there is a Putinist Russia. And so, from my perspective, again, Trump is incapable of ending this war. And the reason why Trump is incapable of ending this war is because there's only one person who is capable of ending it, that's Putin, and he does not want an end to this war. He might want it to continue on a lower level of intensity because Russia really is running down some of its resources. But the idea that Trump or anyone else can just find a rational diplomatic way to solve this, I think is unrealistic.
Yeah, so like there is no button that you can actually push on in Putin's mind that would make him to stop.
I mean, I'll say this. I think there is that button, and it's a pretty robust NATO troop presence, pretty close to the front lines in Ukraine. If we could get a peacekeeping force that actually is capable of defeating the Russian military, that would change Putin's calculus. It would no longer be possible for the Russian military to wipe eastern Ukrainian towns off the map if there were American soldiers there. And if the 82nd Airborne were in Kherson, I expect that the drone safari, which Russian drone operators are training by hunting down civilians in Kherson right now. I don't think they would be doing that against American soldiers. But given that the outgoing U.S. administration was not even close to prepared, willing to put American soldiers even in Western Ukraine, I see no indication that the Western world is going to take the steps necessary with Trump as its leader that would actually push that button in Putin's head. So I expect things to continue. I expect Trump to actually get some credit in the United States, gain some political capital when he makes what appear to be sincere attempts to bring both parties to the table to sit down. There might even be talks, the way that there were in Belarus and in Turkey in the early weeks of the full-scale war. And there might even be leaks from those talks that we're so close to reaching a deal. But I'm exceptionally skeptical that the Russian side is actually interested in ending the fighting. And nothing Trump can do other than physically stopping the Russian military from being able to take offensive actions. Nothing short of that is going to end this conflict anytime in the foreseeable future.
That's very vocal, and Trump do not understand it. Doesn't understand it, right?
I think Trump certainly does not understand that, but Biden didn't understand that. His whole team of Russia experts did not understand that, and that's why we are where we are, and that's why we are likely to be in a very similar position for quite a long time going forward, because Ukraine will continue to fight. Ukrainians do not have a choice between war and peace. If there was a choice between war and peace, Ukrainians would choose peace. Ukrainians don't have that. They have a choice between war and Bucha. And war is better than Bucha.